Just answering questions with Whap Tech. I have a woven basket sitting in a bike's metal basket or something of that nature, and it makes noise every time I hit a bump. So I zip tied it, and that was nice, but eventually they came undone, and now I'm back to the noise. If a set of zip ties, the number you placed in the positions you did, broke after a while, put 3 times as many and see if it holds. Oftentimes that works. Also try different versions of the zip ties if you can get a random extra back. Get them thicker. Next. There's a wood box basket upgrade or something of that nature they provide extra long bolts for, but I don't like it. Now, there's an implication the person wants to put in shorter bolts and lower profile nuts and that sort of thing. How do I determine what size I need? How do I tell what the bolt size is? Bolts are sold in several standards, metric and what's called inch standard. Now, the inch standard has several substandards. One of them is based on always rounding everything off to about the 16th of an inch for practical work. If you're doing woodwork, that's good enough because you can kind of jam a bolt or nut or screw into service if it'll fit into the hole, because it's based on the hole size it goes through. That's exactly right. That means it can be smaller than what the size is. It can say 1/4 inch, but it can be 0.24 inches. Hint, hint. Now, that also means that there's an equivalent or close to equivalent that'll be in metric. And there's also a very weird sizing standard right between a rounded off metric size and an inch size. They may be in different order of operations, but some companies will use the number right in the middle and make it to where you can get away with using the wrong nut or the wrong bolt with them, and they'll work. And that's become a strong standard in some countries because no matter how you measure it, you'll get it close enough. And again, the numbers are just based on the hole it goes through, so they don't treat it as very standardized. The next thing I got to point out is on a bolt, there'll be a thread pitch. How many of these bumpy parts per inch? And the metric equivalent says how far apart they are, which means, oddly enough, you get a lower quality measurement from metric. In fact, because people round things off in metric a lot, they're off most of the time, a huge amount, which people in Britain and European Union don't like hearing sometimes, especially when they break a fucking firearm. I have a video dissertation on why 1/1000th of an inch may be better than you using metric, hands down. And remember, you can measure it in 1/1000th of an inch, fractions of an inch, like half an inch is still kind of accurate. Half, that has a lot of variation to it. And also like hundredths, thousandths of an inch. Well, we can also have 128ths of an inch. So we're going to measure this. I'm going to tell you ahead of time, if I put this on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it while it's turned off. This is an electronic version, and it has the ability to internally convert metric and inch. I'm going to turn it on. I don't even know which one it is. And it says millimeters. And I'm going to click the button so it says fractions of an inch, and then close it. That'll give me 0.247. Now, if I do it again, I get 0.246. Okay, that's pretty good. It's actually 0.24 or 0.247. But if I hit the button for inch to metric, it says it's either 6.2 or 6.1 millimeter. Because that number is a very roundish sounding number. And if you look it up on Amazon and look up shank, that's this part up here right underneath the head, diameter of 6.1 millimeter, you'll find measured shank 6.1 millimeter, and it'll say 6 millimeter bolt, which means it won't fit into a 6 millimeter drilled hole. Guess what happens if you get a hold of a 6 millimeter drill bit and check its actual maximum diameter when it's drilling? It's 6.1 millimeters. Then why the fuck does it say? Because they have that standard. Let's measure it another way. You might think, okay, well, I'll measure it down by the threads. If it's done right, the threads should be the same diameter. So I'm just going to turn it off again. The reason I turn it off is it removes the ability for electronic interference to interfere with it. And I'm going to bring it down here, and I'm going to put it in here and try to get this to hang on tightly and give me an accurate number this way. Now, why am I doing it that way? Because doing it the other way, it can cause more errors. This is rounding off all of the errors because the threads are not required to be the same diameter. Now I'll turn on the power, remove it, and then close it. 6.14 millimeters, it says, or 0.4 excuse me, 0.242 inches. Yeah, there's a lot of variation in that. And I guarantee if I rotate it a couple of degrees, it'll get a different number. So let's decide it's a 0.24 inch or a 6.1 millimeter. Okay, that's our information we have to work with. And then we look for the next size up as the name that are given to bolts, and that'll get us in the right range. But we have to take it with us and measure to make sure the nuts will fit it and make sure it really is that diameter. Because you'll be able to hold them in your hands and find out the ones that are marked 6 millimeter aren't fitting, they're too big, even though it should be smaller. And the ones that say inch, well, what fraction is that? Okay, here's how we figure out fraction. 0.24, just use the closest number. It's drill bit sizes that are going to be wrong. Don't even get me started on the ones that are labeled by letter of the alphabet. 0.240 times 16. Now we end up with a number that says 3.84 sixteenths of an inch. That's obviously can't be correct. So let's multiply it by something outrageous, 128. That works out to 30 128ths, but it doesn't because it's got a little fraction at the end. That strongly indicates this is a millimeter-based bolt, right? No, it doesn't have to. Again, it could be a hybrid between two sizes, so it'll fit into most shit. And it also find out if you do the kind of halfway thing, the metric and the SAE American Standard ones will probably thread onto it if they pick the thread pitch exactly right. It's done for sales purposes. There's not a standard here. But if you want to know what happens if we decide that it has to be 31 128ths, which is the closest one I'd come up with. And it comes up as 0.242 inches, which is really, really close. So we're going to call that 0.242, 31 128ths, or 6.1 millimeter, even though it's not 6.1 millimeter. Then we look it up on Amazon, and it'll say measured shank or measured diameter or drill hole size, 6.0 millimeter, or 31 128ths. For some reason, they have something that weird. And it'll say type quarter inch or type 5/16 or something like that. It'll give you a number that'll be close enough. So how do we measure the size of our nuts, bolts, screws, shanks, heads, all the euphemisms and jokes you want to do? We measure them close enough, and then we just go to the next size up. If you want to get an exact fit for what you got, you just go to the hardware store and keep trying them with the different things. They'll have a little board where you put them in, and that's how you do it. This is one of those things where literally guys don't ask instructions on how or directions. The reason is that most guys who deal with engineering principles find people who don't. I'm not trying to justify the guy who won't ask directions and clearly gets you lost in the middle of nowhere and you're in the cabin in the woods and there's an axe murderer, but there is kind of a reason why asking these kind of questions literally lead off a cliff. You go to the hardware store and measure it. You can also ask them, just say, look, I'm tired of messing with it. I need a duplicate of this that is this long. You literally say it has to be this long for my project. It has to take the same nut, bolt, screw kind of combination. And if it isn't a standard one, if it's halfway one or hybrid, say so. And the guy at the hardware store that you ask will probably be used to it. But again, there's a board for self-help. Please try that first. They want to see you try. Now, why do I know anything about this? PSI ratings. If you're building a 12-gauge shotgun, one of the tricks is to get a really big bolt with harsh threads that's hardened steel and crank it into the back of a pipe and use that to make a muzzle loader. But you have to drill a hole through it. So what you do is you get one that's annealed, low-grade shit, and then you heat treat it. Or you buy one that's high-grade, heat treat it, and ruin the tempering, drill a hole in it, and then harden it up again to where it's like a drill bit, and then freaking crank it into something, and then weld it shut on the end. That's for making a muzzle loader. It's also usable for making a slam-fire shotgun. I've had to look this up before. Pro tip, one of the sizes for a drill bit that they put out that's used all the time for firearms is the number 1 drill bit. It's called number 1. Well, is that 1/16 of an inch? Nope. It's almost exactly 0.223. It's actually 0.224, which is exactly the chamber diameter for a 22 long rifle. Then why is it called a number 1 bit? No one has any clue. It's just called that. It's called a wire drill bit because it's for number 1 wire. It's a gauge diameter. And no, I have no clue why that's important. All I know is that's the drill that you get if you want to get almost a perfect drill bit for making a chamber in a piece of barrel liner. Standards are great. Everyone has one of their own, and none of them make any sense. So, how do you tell what size the bolt is? You guess, and then you test the one you got. If all you have is a nut, you test to see what screw it or bolt it fits on, and that's close enough. If all you got's the bolt, you do the same thing the other way around, and it's close enough. And the sizings are based on what hole will fit, which is so vague it doesn't matter. And yes, Amazon will actually have measured diameters for shank or measured diameter for bolt measured diameter. Add to that the fact that many socket sets state what diameter the head is, because that's the important part of the socket, but some of the references will talk about a bolt being a 1-inch bolt. No, that's the head for it. That's not the shank diameter. So anyway, to review, how do you determine what size you need? You guess and you test what you got. If you're lucky and you have this in your hand, you can find an exact duplicate. Maybe. Let's talk about the symbols on the back. This one has 3 lines that radiate out from the middle, and it has SJ. SJ is standing for maybe a standard or the company name. It could be anything. If it's a 3-digit one, it's usually company name, but it could be anything. The 3 lines. I'm going to bring up a page that's on Engineer's Toolbox or Engineer's Edge. 3 lines in this case is SAE, American Standard, J429, Grade 5, or ASTM, A449. What the frack does that mean? Okay, so when we look it up, it says that it has a PSI rating. We're using American standards here. PSI means the literal number of pounds it can use or be exposed to. There's proof load, yield strength, and tensile strength. No matter what they say they mean, one of them is a large number, and the other one has the smallest number, 74,000 pounds to 120,000 pounds here. It specifies the yield strength as the tension level it has when it starts becoming ductile. It starts stretching or failing in a way that cannot be reversed by simply removing the pressure. There's elastic dimensional change, and then there's permanent non-elastic change where it'll stretch out and become a different bolt size. And that's at 92,000 psi, pounds per square inch. That could also be shear strength for how strong the bolt is. Isn't it just pounds? As a matter of fact, it is. You just ignore that. Unless you're doing shear strength, and then it's PSI. These numbers indicate how strong it will be under tension and also under compression and shear. And you work it out as 74,000 to 120,000 pounds per square inch, or pounds. If it had the lines going like this and then one sticking up the middle, that would be 85,000 to 120,000 pounds. Almost identical. And these are low or medium carbon steel, but they are grade 5 or 5.1. Let's talk about metal grades, because that's totally not going to be boring. If it doesn't have any indication on it, it's grade 2 or lower, low grade metal, not able to handle a lot of pressure. Grade 5 could be 85,000 to 120,000 pounds. That's the range of pressures for various measurements. 150,000 to 20,000 is the dynamic range for stainless steel, chrome, and nickel mix. That's a higher and a lower value for both max ranges. Exactly. Anyway, that's how you look it up. Again, you test them at the hardware store by making sure it'll fit whatever parts to get a replacement. And if you're worried about the strength level, unless it's way above like 20,000 pounds of pressure, you don't care. And if you're reading it, those marks just indicate the pounds or the maker of it. That's it. Or not. Again, the standards are variable and people don't have to comply. And again, if it's metric, it may be looser tolerances than inch for some goddamn reason. And yes, there are hybrids between the two that make it even more confusing. Or they're just standards where they use a letter value or a number that has nothing to do with any kind of ratio or dimensions. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.